This is in your business.
This is in your business.
In your business.
This is 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 in your business for the UMSL Business Podcast.
My name's Kevin Deere, and I'll be hosting the podcast tonight. Tonight I have with me Dr. Maurice Dawson, Dr. Shaji Kahn, and Dr. Dinesh Mirchandani. In the ever-evolving digital landscape that we find ourselves in, cybersecurity is or should be a concern on the minds of every individual taking part in online transactions. This applies to the people making purchases and divulging personal information on web forums, as well as the businesses requisitioning this information. In this podcast, we'll discuss how cybersecurity aficionados defend your identity today and how they plan to combat new methods in the future. Dr. Maurice Dawson was a former visiting assistant professor of industrial and system engineering at the University of Tennessee Space Institute and Fulbright Scholar to Chelyabinsk, Russia. He is the founding editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Hyperconnectivity and the Internet of Things and co-editor of the book New Threats and Countermeasures in Digital Crime and Cyber Terrorism. Dawson comes to academia with more than 10 years of experience from the defense and aerospace industry. Dawson holds terminal degrees in computer science and cybersecurity. Dr. Shaji Kahn is an assistant professor of information systems at the University of Missouri St. Louis. He has published in journals such as Information Systems Journal, Journal of Strategic Information Systems, and the Journal of Information Technology. He has also presented papers at national academic conferences, authored books, and produced practitioner-oriented research and industry reports. His research interests include offshoring of business services, innovation and entrepreneurship, and management of information technology and information security in high-reliability environments. He is currently developing cybersecurity programs at the University of Missouri St. Louis and teaches in the areas of data networking and information security. Dr. Dinesh Mirchandani is professor of Information Systems and chair of the Information Systems Department at UMSL. He conducts research on information systems and planning in electronic business. So to kick everything off, I'll start with the first question, a really rudimentary question for you guys. What is cybersecurity by definition, and why is it so important in this day and age?
I'll take that. So this is Shaji. So many ways to think about security and many definitions, but I'll give you a simple one. So if you think about information as being your most valuable asset, security is about protecting the confidentiality of that information. In other words, if you're sharing that information, are people who are not supposed to see that data or information not able to see it, right? So that's the confidentiality part. And then we are worried also about two other things. One is integrity. So the way you think about integrity is you sent some information to somebody else, whether that person actually got the same information or did it change during the transmission process or when it was being stored on a disk, for example. So that's integrity, right? So essentially, can you trust your data and information? And then the last is availability, right? So do we have information when we need it, or is there a threat to the availability of the information? For example, can somebody make our systems not usable or not usable when we need them, right? So protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information is the sort of cornerstone of security.
Great answer. Secondly, I'll direct this question at Dinesh. Can you tell me more about the UMSL Cybersecurity Certificate program that UMSL offers and how it differs from a traditional information systems degree?
Sure, Kevin. So our certificate program is composed of 6 courses, whereas a degree program can be somewhere from 16 to 17 courses long. We've designed our certificate very carefully, permitting students from a wide variety of backgrounds to enter into the field. We do not require a prior background in information security. We do take the students right through our introduction course, through into more advanced courses, advanced cybersecurity, software assurance, data networks, and security, and also risk management and business continuity. We are really proud of the fact that we constructed our program brick by brick to make it one of the finest programs in the country. We are accredited by the National Security Agency and the Department of Homeland Security as a center of academic excellence in cyber defense education.
Wow, that's very impressive. And I'm sure many other colleges in the St. Louis area can't really boast that as compared to UMSL.
We are the only in St. Louis, so very proud of that.
And if I could jump in, this is Shaji again. Another interesting part about our program is it's a multidisciplinary program from the beginning. So a common misconception is, security is a very technical problem. It's for the security nerds, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not really the case. It's actually a problem for everybody. And it's a problem for businesses and the business management themselves, right? So the way we are thinking about security is we are saying, okay, let's take a fully multidisciplinary approach, bring everybody on board, not just the technical side, but the business side, everybody involved, and we learn about security and address it from different angles. So that's I think the coolest thing about this program.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. That kind of segues into another question that I have. So how does cybersecurity for companies differ from cybersecurity for individuals?
Well, I think that they're both intertwined. So when you think about cybersecurity for individuals, and you think about internet-connected devices, hyperconnectivity, and individuals thinking having mobile devices and not securing them, when they actually walk into that company, that device now becomes a point of actual attack that can actually allow them to move laterally within their corporate network. And so for individuals, they have to consider what makes them vulnerable, especially if they're working from home and they haven't updated their router to password and it's just a default and they're doing work. At work, they have to think about, as an organization, what are the controls that make the organization more secure for actually operating in?
And in security, we have this saying that the weakest link are the people, right? So we have things like there's no patch for human stupidity and things like that. So essentially, in the security world, people often equate employees and the regular business users as the weakest link, and that's actually true to a certain extent. If you think about if you go through the 20 big breaches in the last 2-3 years, you will see a connection to somebody, a human, falling victim to some kind of social engineering attack. So it's very fascinating. It's related, and individuals who are worried about their own security, their devices, security of their devices, are also probably going to do better in an organizational context.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I actually watched a small TV series on Netflix called Cybercrime that had a small portion of one of their episodes detailing how the NSA did a little experiment where they took these flash drives and placed around 10 of them in parking lots outside of their buildings and to see if anyone would actually pick these up and do anything with them. And literally 5 of the 10 flash drives were picked up and put into computers inside the NSA. And so their employees failed this test, which is kind of hilarious when you think like, wow, this is their job, or it could be their job, and they're making such a strange mistake.
I mean, one of the biggest things or the issues is the human factor. So when you look at the human component, I mean, that can always fail. So when you're actually targeting just that, I mean, you're going to have the, I guess there's consensus that something or a certain percentage will actually fail those tests.
Right. They're keying on there's the human curiosity factor that everyone has, like what's on this flash drive? I'm so curious. I need to find out,
Right. And if I can add, Kevin, some organizations which are really at the forefront of protecting their information, they actually run simulations within their organizations where they send out spam email and they see which employees actually respond to that. So being able to gamify the situation where they can educate employees on not clicking certain links, not opening certain emails. Many organizations that are very aware, I should say, do try to simulate these scenarios?
Yeah, so the long story short, for an average business user, it's becoming increasingly more important to be security conscious to begin with, right? So we can't expect everybody to be a security expert, right? There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of details when you get into the technical part of it. But what can we do to bring people to a certain level of awareness and mindfulness, so to speak, right? So are you aware of what's happening around you? Are you security conscious in every action you take? It's a lot to ask of a typical business user, because business users are obviously worried about getting their job done. So security is really a sort of a tug of war between getting things done from the business side and then doing it securely and doing it well enough. So this is the interesting part about security.
And your response actually acts as a nice bridge into my next question. So this kind of pertains to mobile security and the fact that people are becoming more and more plugged in. We're constantly on our mobile devices, whether it be social media or research or, even in conducting finance moves. Is there a need for people to start using an antivirus for their smartphones, or will that be a need in the future?
That's a need now. So there's a need to use antivirus for your smartphones. The problem is when you're actually using a mobile device, you have to think about the size of the screen. And say you get an email on a computer, you can right-click and investigate that link to see if it's a legitimate link. But when you actually get it via a smartphone or a mobile device, it's hard to see. So it's a huge difference with that form factor of the device and actually being able to investigate those links. And a lot of times when you're actually on various sites and say you're downloading, you're looking at something, your phone can be contaminated, and then when you plug your phone to your actual laptop or your desktop to actually transfer files, you're now further spreading that virus to your network or to your organization's network.
Wow. So from there, I'd kind of like to ask, how can a consumer distinguish whether or not a site that they're divulging their personal information to is using software that will protect their identity? Is there any indicators that the site will give you so that you know that you're being protected before you're giving this information out?
Yeah, you have the HTTPS, right? So you have the secure HTTPS, but the problem is you don't necessarily understand how that data is being managed. The biggest hack recently, the Friend Finder hack, they had an HTTPS, but the problem was they were storing passwords in plain text, and accounts that should have been deleted were actually still stored there. And so their actual site was protected, but the back-end data for that site and the actual system that were actually maintaining that data wasn't. And that was something that no one would have known unless they actually were internal to the organization. So there's a lot of other things to think about. So you have the website, but then you also have all these other systems, again, that are interconnected. And so, again, it's only one weak spot.
So, with the increased prevalence of smartphones and everything, there's just more backdoors for these cyber criminals to be, exploiting.
Well, it's not even just smartphones. With internet-enabled devices, right? So you have your nice Bluetooth pan to track how you're cooking. That and as well could be a vulnerability spot. You have your phone with all not your phone, but your car with internet inside and all these other things unprotected. There's too many unprotected devices. You think about your Nest or any type of embedded device. It could be running an old operating system that has a ton of vulnerabilities attached to it that hasn't been patched. That can be a point of exploit.
Yeah, so when you think about, in general, like when you're online, you are going to look for a site that is using SSL or secure socket layers, or TLS as it's called. So what that implies is you look at the URL, it starts with HTTPS as opposed to HTTP. And you see a little lock icon or a padlock. That essentially tells you that the site is using encryption as it sends the data from your computer or your smartphone to the company's website. So that's the bare minimum you should be looking at. Having said that, when you're online, there's really no expectation of privacy, so to speak, in the sense that they're still collecting your data. But at least as the data travels from your device to the company's web server, at least it's using encryption. So that's the bottom line of being online. Yeah.
Very interesting. So another question that I had for you guys, So when people are going into the, public zones where there are free Wi-Fi connectivity, so whether it be a coffee shop, a Starbucks, a bread company, whatever it may be, and you're connecting to this free Wi-Fi network, I mean, how common is it that someone is actually phishing for your data on these open networks? And if they are, how can you avoid that?
So the short answer is it's not as common as it was about 3 to 4 years ago. Having said that, if you're using open Wi-Fi, the simplest thing you could do is use VPN, virtual private networks. For example, at UMSL, we have free VPN for faculty and students and staff. You download a VPN client, a virtual private network client, and use that anytime you're on any kind of open Wi-Fi. And the short reason to do that is in an open network, you're not using encryption. So there's no encryption. So when data travels from your device to the local open Wi-Fi network, it's all out in the open. So VPN is the short answer.
Okay, and how exactly would someone go about, procuring one of these VPN servers?
You don't really need to do that. For example, at UMSL, you have a free VPN gateway that you can use. All you need to do is install what's known as a virtual private network client. You install it on your computer or your smartphone, and then you connect to UMSL's VPN gateway. All the instructions are online, of course, on UMSL's ITS website. And it's very easy to do. It's one of the simplest things you could do. And of course, when you're out there, try not to connect to a network that you don't know about. It's kind of, as I said earlier, like 3-4 years ago, it would have been a lot easier for somebody to sort of fake a network. So we used to call them rogue access points. So I could be sitting next to you in Starbucks and pretending to be Starbucks. And instead of you connecting to Starbucks network, you would connect to my device. It has gotten more difficult to carry out in general, but it's still possible.
So kind of segueing from there, cyber threats are definitely constantly evolving in modern technology. How exactly are cybersecurity specialists adapting their methods and strategies to combat these new threats that are becoming more and more prevalent?
So as you can imagine, the threat landscape, so to speak, is constantly evolving. As new technologies come in, new vulnerabilities also pop up, right? So the way you think about it is anywhere we have software, we have the possibility of vulnerabilities in that piece of software. And the moment you have vulnerabilities, then you have the possibility that somebody might figure out a way to exploit those vulnerabilities. And in many ways, sadly enough, security is a catch-up game where you're always trying to figure out, how do you fix this problem and this problem. So one of the things that needs to change in the field of security, and we are trying to do that in our programs, is build security into our processes, our software, the way we do things, right? Instead of thinking about security as an add-on that you do something after the fact, we are trying to build it into while we are developing systems.
Preemptive measure.
Preemptive, right? So, but it's a lot more difficult than you can imagine, right? So it's not an easy thing to do, and things will, I think, get worse with the increasing prevalence of even more connected devices. So now we are in the era of Internet of Things, as Mo was saying. So your toaster is connected, your fridge is connected, your car is connected. And the simple way to think about it is the more connected we are, the more exposed we are, because, well, now devices are online. If there are vulnerabilities in those devices, then they can be exploited. So I could give you like 1,000 examples here.
And just adding to that, so when you think about that, the U.S., we technically don't build a lot of hardware products. And so one of the growing security issues is hardware assurance. So actually putting vulnerabilities actually in the hardware components themselves. And so, and then also for developing countries that actually get software from elsewhere, their software generally doesn't have the patches needed. So they'll get a software package or they'll get a couple of computer systems, and it's left unpatched. And so then it's left completely vulnerable. And so that's something as well. In terms of the threat landscape, it differs greatly, right? So, but the key thing is understanding how to implement security, or we have something called the Security Technical Implementation Guide about hardening a system. But again, how many people actually harden their system? They go and they buy a Windows machine, or are they going to spend the hour to make sure that the device is locked down so they don't have to worry about security?
So as you mentioned, the Internet of Things and how people are becoming more and more connected. So with the advancement of autonomous vehicles that drive themselves, how likely is it that a hacker would actually be able to get in and control someone's vehicle, or is that likely at all?
It's actually more possible than you might imagine. In fact, Charlie Miller, if you know him, is a St. Louis native. He works for Uber now, I think. He and his team were able to break into Jeep Chrysler remotely and stop it at I think 6440 highway. So it's very possible. It's one of the biggest worries about all the people who are pushing autonomous vehicles, right? So they're not taking this lightly. But in general, the way you think about it is the more connected you are, the more vulnerable you are. The more devices you have, the devices run software. Software, by definition, is not perfect. None of the systems we developed are perfect. So there will always be some vulnerability that somebody will figure out how to exploit. And if it can be done, quite likely it will be done.
Yeah, and on a more serious note, and the U.S. Army has a plan to have their rotary aircraft go unmanned. So they're trying to get rid of the actual pilot. The issue is the ability to change the flight plans of those unmanned systems. And so now you have a armed vehicle, whether it's a rotary wing or a unmanned aircraft or UAV or whatever. Now you have the ability to change the flight plans or actually attack the remote video terminal and change pretty much the direction and the guidance that you're giving to the unmanned system.
Yeah, and from there, you could have countries targeting other countries, making allies into enemies, because there are these rogue vehicles who, they may be a U.S. unmanned airship attacking a Russian other ship in the sky. And
in unmanned community, a lot of the UAVs are pretty much, you look at a certain unmanned aircraft like a Shadow, that is built by the U.S. and is built by Textron Systems. And you look at some of the Israeli UAVs, and, if it happens to attack another group of individuals, then Israelis or the U.S. will be blamed.
Exactly. So from there, I'd like to talk a little bit more about how I feel that for someone to understand how to protect computers and online shoppers from identity theft, they kind of have to know how to get around these barriers as well. So how exactly do information security agencies go about hiring individuals, upright and morally upright individuals for their companies? And how do they gauge who is and who is not a morally upright person?
So that's a classic problem. It's not a security-specific problem, right? So obviously we want ethics in all our business operations, but you realize there's a lot. There's a very thin line of difference between what's morally correct and not correct in terms of security. So you could be very easily blurring the lines, so to speak. So. Having said that, companies are always worried about finding people who are going to uphold security values, like the ethical. So we have terms such as ethical hacking or ethical penetration testing. So these are people who are trying to break into systems, but follow the norms and regulations for doing it the right way, right? So companies hire people like third-party consulting firms to come in and break their network. So they're having authorization. Go ahead.
And the people in these fields, I'm sure, are aware of the legal ramifications of their actions should they choose to go against the grain.
Absolutely, and that's why for our students we developed we have developed like sandbox environments to practice hacking or penetration testing in a safe environment. Pretty much, if you come to Mo's class, for example, or my class, and you start doing those assignments, pretty much all of those things will be illegal if you did them outside in the real world. So again, understanding the difference between right and wrong, and and following those guidelines is very important.
Yeah, back working in aerospace and defense, a security clearance, for example, up to 10 years of background checks. They'll investigate the neighbor of your neighbor when you were like 6 years ago, whatever. They talk to your professors at your school, people that knew you. They look at your financial records, different behaviors and activities. If you have to get a polygraph, they actually send you to a polygraph machine. And even still, you have events like Edward Snowden and a few others. There's an entire list of pictures you usually see at a defense company near the security office of all these people who have actually sold information or worked for other governments and been spies for other governments. So even with all those checks, things still happen.
It's just a matter of doing the best you can to filter out untrustworthy individuals, I guess. So I have one last question for you guys. We've covered some really interesting topics tonight, but to kind of end things off, what's just one quick tip each of you can give to our listeners regarding cybersecurity and how they can be safer?
I'll start. So go back to the basics, right? So security sounds very complex, but in simple terms, it works, and you go back to the basics. For the average user, I recommend following the guidelines of keeping your operating system up to date. Always install the updates. If you're using a Windows machine, if it says Windows updates are available, you install them. And have an antivirus on your machine, and have a firewall. These are all default on Windows. For Macs, it's a little bit different, but essentially always keep your systems updated. Same goes for your mobile devices, and follow basic guidelines. Don't click on links that sound suspicious. It's very simple.
And I would say be careful about the information you post on social media. A lot of that information can actually be traced to passwords that you set for systems. Like if you have a family member's name or your birth date, some of that information can easily be misused to break your password.
Yeah, I would say password, don't write any of your passwords down. Make sure you change it at least every 90 days. Limit the amount of ports you're actually using. Perform scans on software that you actually have. I mean, you can just have, like Shaji was saying, just have an AV and have it run like every day. Just, do a passive scan, and maybe like once a week, do a full scan. And then also, if you're doing anything with social media, remove the metadata or the EXIF data so people can't start to mine the actual data that you put out there, knowing like your geotags, which will tell your latitude and longitude. Or if you're actually using one email account, try not to use it for all your different accounts. So if someone does actually take over that account, they don't have access to 15 other accounts.
Right, they can't reset all of your passwords. Just
Correct.
one. All right, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to come and talk with us tonight. I think we all learned some really interesting things. So Maurice, Dinesh, and Shaji, I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right, thanks for having us.